Hello and welcome back. This is Dollars and Dragons, episode 8, I believe. And we have here with us Dave Walker. If you'd like to just briefly introduce yourself, Dave.
Hey, I'm Dave. I'm a fan of fantasy role-playing games. I don't work it professionally, sort of semi-professionally, I guess you could say. I got my start helping to run online video games, like role-play intensive video games, and I currently spend a lot of my time writing plot and stuff for LARPs run by a UK company called Profound Decisions.
You've
And
been
I'm writing for
paid.
the Vineyard, and
Yeah.
I've just interrupted you. I apologize, but yes,
No,
I'm
you're
also
good.
excited to say that I'm writing for the Vineyard.
Yeah, so you've been paid for it, right? Like with the LARP stuff, do you get paid?
No, unfortunately, it is volunteered. I mean, I get paid in a
Oh.
way, not in exposure. In fact, I'm completely behind the scenes. But they basically put us up for the weekend.
Oh, okay.
They
Compensated.
provide all the tools. We get free meals and everything.
Cool.
It's kind of an interesting. I don't want to say culture because it sounds really overwrought, but it's very much in the UK Fest LARPs. We get like 2,000 players. It's a really big thing here, and so it is very much like a community. I know a lot of people exploit that in some region in some areas, especially in our hobby or the wider hobby. But here it is because you're all in person, you're all hanging out, wearing silly costumes in a field. It is a bit more tolerable just to be getting paid in food and lodging.
Right. Yeah. That's super cool. That's kind of like I think the equivalent over in the United States or something very similar, probably born of those sort of LARP activities, is what's popular now is like these festivals that go on for like a week or 2 weeks or something like that where people really disconnect. What's the normal like is it like a week long or 2 weeks or like how does it normally work for the one that you work for?
We have 3 weekends a year, and it's usually Friday until Sunday afternoon. So Friday evening, we usually have time in around about 5, and then we finish up on Sunday around about 3 p.m. That's
Okay.
that's quite common for big LARPs like Empire.
Yeah. And you said you write plots and like you interact with the LARPers and stuff like that. It's kind of like a storyteller, right? Would that be kind of like a similar a GM? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think there's lots of comparisons between what I do in LARP and stuff that happens when I used to run plots in MUDs, in the sense that we do a lot of preparation work running up to the event. We'll write up briefs for our NPCs, which aren't like playing pieces on a board anymore. They're like literal people who will be playing a role. So there's a bit of a sort of a theatre influence there. We'll source props and costumes and stuff like that. We'll work with SFX groups. And then on the weekend, all those plans go out the window when it gets chaotic because there's so many people involved. But you're running it from what we call behind the hedge, because the field's usually split up into the player field and the bit where all the crew and stuff are hanging out, and we'll be sort of lurking there, sort of peeking over the edge and seeing what's going on now and then.
Okay. Yeah, super cool. How long you been doing that for?
So I got into LARPing like in 2000, I think about 2014. I tried playing it, but it just wasn't for me. Like it's very, I was going to say it's a very social. But I was telling myself there a little bit, but it's one of those things where it's really hard just to turn up on your own. To some of them, I think Empire is quite different because it's really put all its documentation on the internet. I think it feels a lot more. I want to say I won't say modern because it's not quite there really, but
Hmm.
a lot of the other ones, like this first LARP I went to, their rule book was a scanned PDF of something that they'd xeroxed. So it was really sort of arcane and difficult to get into. And so I spent all my time doing what they call monstering, which is where players will spend a bit of time volunteering to play low intensity sort of NPC roles like monsters and stuff. And I realized I was like, I'm paying £70 a weekend to go and play, and then I'm spending most of my time just volunteering. So I looked into it, and I ended up finding Empire, where the crew there are, you don't have to pay a ticket to get in there at the gate, and they give you all the benefits, like I mentioned. And it just
Hmm.
naturally rose from there. Like I started off on the skirmish crew, spending all weekend running around wearing a rubber orc mask and hitting things with foam swords. And then eventually I was like, oh, I could probably write some of these plots. And so I got into it that way.
Yeah. For those events, I assume that just basically the company probably makes money on the businesses that cater to everything, right?
So yeah, there's a lot of collaboration between the event
Vendors.
yeah, the vendors and the LARP organizers, like a lot of the industry is quite hobbyist orientated. So a lot of people like leather crafters, people who make the foam weaponry, costumers and stuff like that. There's really a good front for those sort of creatives to they'll pay a business ticket or something, and they get to set up inside the in character tent village, and then there's also the food vendors and stuff like that. But they do probably make a lot of money out of the tickets as well. To be honest, it is very much because I think they when you've not if you've not got what they call students and unemployed get a discount on it, but I think it's around about £75 for the weekend for a player ticket.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha. Pretty cool. How many like what's the biggest battle that you've seen at an event like that?
It's been getting bigger year after year. I know that on the continent in Germany, for example, there's some LARPs, like one called Drachenfest, where they have thousands of people involved in big battles. But in Empire, the biggest ones have been about like 400, 400 or so, maybe 300 at either side, so about 600, and it keeps getting bigger year after year. We've been really noticing that post COVID, every event this year, for example, they've beaten previous records for attendance. So it seems like it's one of those experience based sort of hobbies where people are sort of willing to put down the money to experience something as opposed to just buy more splat books.
Yeah. Yeah. Splat books. Who buys splat books? I hope all of our listeners, because that's what we're selling. But yeah. Okay. And you mentioned being administrator on a mud. Can you describe just what a mud is for our listeners? Probably don't know.
Yeah, so MUDs are like I won't say a precursor to modern role playing games, but I think they filled a niche that Discord and paid DMing, or at least DMing online now, fills quite well. But back in the day, people would host servers, and you could connect using a protocol called Telnet, and it allowed you to have a text based sort of interaction, like a chat room almost, but there was it's just run by bots, right? So you would look around, you could see what the description of a room is, and you could type commands to interact with things. But that medium really lent itself to storytelling and developing role playing. So where a lot of people who play them to just hack and slash and stuff nowadays have probably found more exciting, engaging things like EverQuest or World of Warcraft. Well, that's really dated me, hasn't it? But a lot of the genre still persists today because you can create a lot of assets really, really fast by writing, and it really allows people to immerse themselves. So that's sort of the one I was playing on. Well, not playing on, not running, but contributing to was like a role play intensive mud.
Yeah, and I remember interacting with you as my storyteller in several instances, or one of the administrators who were overseeing like my storyteller in kind of over the years, and that's how we kind of got to know each other in part was through that first. And it was definitely a different sort of environment for role playing, in which instead of being at a table and having like an intimate relationship, in comparison, when you're playing like at the same table, you sort of had more of a disconnected experience with someone, and it seemed more akin to dealing with someone that might know you as a caseworker or just customer service. Um, what was it like to like kind of be an administrator and a storyteller in that environment, as opposed to like our more traditional environment, like running a game over a table?
Yeah, I mean, I oversaw the clans you were in. I didn't kill you every time we interacted as well. So I mean, that's
Not every time. That's right.
not every time. But chiefly, it just seemed like most of the time I interacted with you was to kill one of your characters in a gruesome way. But yeah, no, you're right. It is very. It's got that a weird sort of disconnect between you as a staffer who is sort of stepped aside and is in a GM role, and so there needs to be a certain degree of I'm not just having hanging out with your friends, because there's got to be sort of a sense of impartiality, or we convince ourselves there needs to be, and then you want to run plots for people, but you can't really directly go and talk with them. You can't have a session zero around what's going to happen next. I mean, when I say you can't, I'm saying that these frameworks don't have never sort of encountered that. These are quite modern sort of concepts, and so they've not really integrated them into the way that people interact with them. So it does become you can become quite, if you're very person focused in it, it can be quite a alienating experience where you don't really understand the person because you're not getting full richness of communication, being able to go, oh, see a second and say, hey, is everything okay, and stuff like that. But it does appeal to someone like me who I love sort of developing worlds and running, sort of making things feel real and immersive, because it makes you focus a bit more on the environment. You want to try and create things that are really detailed, that speak of a rich sort of underlying history where everything has some meaning to it, and it gives you a little bit of space to think about things and act. Where I find when I'm DMing, it can be quite sort of difficult sometimes to sort of have that sort of barrier, because I tend to quite want to reach out and start interacting with people and doing that. So there's certainly two sides to it, but I think it does create an environment where you can become quite alienated, and if you don't have the proper distance from what's going on, and that's not easy when you're dealing with high emotive situations such as which these role playing intensive environments try to produce.
Yeah, it's definitely very different, and it seems like there can be a lot of unintentional disconnect for sure, and miscommunication in that model, because the game's running all the time, right? And things can definitely happen to give a player context that the administrator or the storyteller is very unaware of. And it seemed like with the model of sort of leadership reports that you have for like the leaders of clans and stuff like that, um, to would help fill in the gaps, but there was oftentimes like a very big disconnect between the players and the staff for that reason. So it seemed in a lot of ways kind of like a playground that when the staff members got too directly involved, it felt almost as though we were playing two separate games. There was the game as it exists when the staff are not animating, and then there's the game when staff are animating. And you don't know when that's going to happen. And you don't know when to interact with things, or if things are going to remain consistent based on previous interactions. So I found myself, especially as a much younger player, and this was, I think, maybe when I was in my early 20s and like mid 20s, over 10 years ago, right? So I would be interacting in a certain way, and then I would have a storyteller do a particular type of thing that would be fit within like the theme and the tone, and then later on something else would happen which would completely turn it on its head. So a lot of the time it felt like whenever, and you see this sort of happen a lot with players when they start interacting with something they believe is like a staff interaction, they will just run with it and just be obedient to whatever they think the story is that the staff is telling, rather than interacting with it in a character in a way that their character would. Um, so I think it's now looking back on it, obviously I don't agree that it's like the best way to interact or role play. Just based solely on that, just because of that. And there's other very distinct challenges, I think, as well. But that was the biggest thing for me, was like whenever staff came around, it would feel like it was a different game. And if I did not interact with the plot or whatever they were doing, I felt as though I was being punished, either figuratively or actually, because I just was playing a different game than them in that respect. So it never felt like, unlike in D&D or any of these other games that we play around a table where you build a personal relationship with someone, you're playing together. It never felt like I was playing together with people in MUDs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of something from Apocalypse World, which is one of my favorite sort of role playing games. It's the idea that role playing games are conversation, and while there might be a parts of that conversation might rise above the what we I guess you could call the layer of abstraction, there is supporting discussion that's going, like building context. Like you might describe like a sweeping vista, and you say, "Oh, there's a giant white pyramid stood at the center of the city," and somebody goes like, "Oh, is it like a sort of flat-sided pyramid like an Egyptian one?" It's like, no, it's a tiered ziggurat. And I mentioned that because that's a perfect example of that sort of disconnect between each individual player. And I guess this is a weakness of it being a text-based medium, is that people will read the same description, the same text, the same output, and they'll get vastly different things from it. And there's no way to build that consensus. And it just ends up that everybody's playing a different game. And like you mentioned, like one staffer might hit the note which really aligns with the game world that you've picked up and you've interpreted from all this text and the experience of the sort of shared experience. And then somebody else will come along who, they've not read the thing the same way. They've got sort of a different attitude on it. And so you lose that consistency, because it's like having multiple DMs, but you're not able to talk to the DMs to get context, and you can't establish amongst yourselves like what color is the sky, for example. That's in Armageddon, that's like a constant question. It's like, it turns out it's red, but it's really hard because a lot of rooms were written by somebody who forgot to read the world guide and wrote that it's blue, and it takes a lot of effort, I think, in an environment where there's that controlled communication avenue to build that. And I think it's probably impossible to a certain extent. And I mean, that's the strength of especially nowadays, when we can have a voice call and play D&D online. You can say, okay, well, the game is still going, people are still immersed, but we've just taken a moment to say, yeah, this is what it's like. Oh, this is what this is, and players can ask conversation. It's more of a back and forth. It's more human, because humans are about conversation as well. I mean, that's quite a bold statement to make, but I think it's closer to how we operate than a prompt, a terminal where you're getting outputted text.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the time, what I found, especially being a pro GM now, I run 12 games a week average. Sometimes a little bit more, and then I find myself like, I'm not doing that many next week. But right now I'm at 12, and what I found, besides like getting really efficient at things, is that most people are really not deciding on a game based on how amazing or performative that you are. Performative is the wrong word there. Or how like theatrical your performance is. It's really mostly about like, do they like you? Do they like playing with you and the other players? That's 90% of the decision. It's like you can have a pretty bare bones experience as far as like bells and whistles and stuff like that. But if the players aren't fun to play with, like most people are honestly just looking for other people who they vibe well with and get along with and can feel safe around, most importantly. And that's what drives people to pursue professional GMs. And I'm sure it's very similar for free GMs. I did that for a while too while I was building my skill set and kind of learning all of that. But a majority of the conversation, I suppose, was in me going from free to professional was, do you lose the human element of it? Does it become solely a business transaction? Do you love it less? No, I don't. Some of my players hung out in voice chat last night and we're talking for like 2 hours afterward just about various things. And I went in there and I wasn't doing anything because I don't have 2 games on Tuesday anymore. And I just hung out and we just talked about stuff. We just gossiped. And like, yeah, that's a natural consequence of like playing games together. They just happen to pay the house. I'm the house. To play there, just like you would go to like a game store or something. That doesn't stop you from making friends with the owners of the game store, or making friends with other players that you're playing with at the game store just because you're paying money to be there, or like being at the LARP, right? So,
and the house always wins, right?
No, not necessarily.
Oh.
Yeah. They kill my NPCs sometimes, even though it makes me sad.
It's interesting, like, because it sort of shows that the split, because I think we could all relate to, there's a lot of games we play where we're playing with strangers, and we're playing because we want to play a game, and that experience of playing a game is very much a solo thing, or you might talk to them in a team chat or something like that. But like the difference between playing League of Legends, like let's say, or a MOBA with like four strangers versus playing with your pals, like people, friends you've made in real life or brought into the game, it's so much different. I guess that's the sort of the different, that's the sort of feel that people look. That's two different sides of the coin, right? We're looking for both those experiences, and I think more and more people are realizing that they can get that latter experience of building community and building relationships, and having a good time in a group, online as well as in person, because and I guess technology has really helped support it in a way. Like you said, you didn't have to have loads of bells and whistles. And ironically enough, Armageddon, I was speaking to one of the original founders of it, which it was founded way back in the late '90s, and they were saying it was literally originally conceived to allow two of the other administrators to run D&D sessions online when they couldn't, because they couldn't drive at the time, so they made
Right.
them. And it's like it's just it's just the same thing over and over again, I guess. People searching for that sort of for that experience, and yeah, no, I see. I played a few sort of pay to play, I guess you could call it, the
Hmm.
DM sessions, and the bells and whistles do make it kind of cool and help draw you in, but you really just enjoy sort of finding people who you can play fun characters with, and who are who would sort of, like you said, the same vibe that you're looking for. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Yeah, I find that the Gen Z really have like efficient language sometimes, and like vibe check is very important. So, um, yeah, because for sure, like I am totally like I'll put up with like uh players I don't really get along with for a little while, but eventually, like if I don't feel safe or comfortable around the table, and that can be for any number of reasons. You don't have to be a bad person to like for me to not have a total gas with playing at the table. Some people who I really like, I don't like playing D&D with them. You know what I mean? Like it's that doesn't mean that we can't be friends or that, you're a bad person. It just means that I'm not going to have as much fun playing with you because we just don't get along as well as um people creating in the space at the same time. And I think that's true of any sort of collaborative effort. You're just naturally going to work better with different people. And preserving that culture at the table is, whatever that culture might be, is very important to a storyteller or a GM because it can be really difficult to make sure that you are being inclusive to the most amount of people possible. Um, that you actually want to be at your table. So it's yeah, sometimes it just doesn't work out, and that's okay.
Yeah, because I mean that's the unique thing about role playing games, isn't it? Well, maybe not unique entirely, but it's like a vehicle for expression almost. Like it's not just like you get out like snakes and ladders or something, which is it's very limited scope. When you run a role playing game, you are using a set of rules to convert your imagination and what you're looking for from the game into a shared experience. And it's like you said, you could be best friends with somebody, but you wouldn't jam with them in a band or something like that. So
Right,
it's that doesn't mean they're any less a person. It's just like, let's just do something else.
right. Yeah. And I find like what's happened in my games a lot of the time now, and I've had to crack down on it because like I think ultimately that can like kill the game. But some of my friends now, my clients, my players, um, who have been playing with me for some of them for 11 months now, and like who amongst us with like who's listening or out there playing D&D, who would kill to have an 11th month party? You know what I mean? Like you've been playing together for 11 months, like you can expect that that's going to go on for a really long time, and you're going to play more than one campaign together. And that's what people are genuinely looking for. A lot of people aren't able to find something like that. And that sort of consistency is definitely something that makes pro GMs appealing because you know that the pro GM is going to keep showing up. So, I mean, I guess for me until I get another job. But for now, that's what I do. I'm going to do it throughout 2023. So they have at least one more year with me, my players. But Um, yeah, I think it can be very special if you make it. And when I was saying before I got distracted about cracking down, my players, because I prompted them and I started to just be more personable with them, I used to like get in and like within 5 minutes, I was running the game. Now I get in and then I talk to them about like what's going on in their lives. And it really started with me just like oversharing because that's who I am as a person because I'm a trans disaster and that's okay. But I started oversharing and it made them more comfortable to share. And now after I've been with the table for 3 or 4 weeks, normally, even if it's a brand new group, they start to share more and more details about their life, and they start to become like a little bit closer, a little more friendly with each other. And the pre-game chatter sometimes takes 45 minutes or an hour before we even get to playing the actual game. Which I now like have a hard limit. It's like if we hit 40 minutes, then we have to go. Like we talk about that later. And then some of my players who have been like in my Critical Role game on Thursday nights love them to death. But there's a segment of that campaign where it should have just taken them like 3 sessions to get to the next area. It took them 15 because they because they would start at the campfire and then they would shit talk to each other for an hour and a half, and then we would go to break, and then they would come back, and then they would be talking about something else, and then they would get distracted, and they would go do something for an hour. Um, but yeah, they loved it, so and they still love it. So I mean, uh, I guess there's a unique lightning in a bottle effect for every table that makes it unique. And when you find it, I think it's difficult to let go because it's so very rare to find something like that.
I mean, as you can attest to, I've stuck with the same pool of sort of people that I run games with. It's people that you're comfortable with, and you know that you can have those conversations with, but like if everybody's happy in that game to have that chat, if they want to have like the social club where you got to pay to get entry, that's fantastic. Like I mean, that's the purest
Yeah.
distillation of like the value of that of the business, is that the proof is in the pudding. That's what I always say. Like whenever people, because I'm sure you've had your own sort of host of people who detract from the idea of paid DMing, but like people don't pay for stuff they don't want. Like that
Yeah.
money tends to, like, in of some in areas, like obviously capitalism doesn't work that way, but I think in D&D, if you're getting somebody to pay and like however many dollars it is for a session, and they're hanging out and having a good time, just talking, shooting the shit, and they're not complaining
Yeah.
at the end of it, then you're doing something right. There's obviously a business value there.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think it's so wild in some ways because I was thinking about that the other day because we kind of like pointed out like we just spent like there was one session where the party got off track and they, instead of doing whatever they were supposed to be doing, they concocted this wild plan which was all built around an inside joke against one of the other party members, and they spent 3 hours on that fucking joke. And that was the entire session, was making fun of the paladin. Was the entire session. And yeah, that was probably one of the funniest sessions that I've ever been a part of, because you wouldn't have that sort of interaction with a brand new table. This is a table that had played together for 11 months, so it's really special, and I love it. And when I get out of pro GMing, I know that I'm going to miss it in a lot of ways because I have such an incredibly different table. Every single game that I go to, it's a different group of people, and every table is like different in some ways that make it really fun, even if I'm running the same campaign. But
No, I was about to say something I completely forgot, so I apologize. Great radio. This is excellent radio.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's talk about how you got involved with the Vineyard, and then besides me just DMing you and being like, "Hey, Dave, do you want to write on this?" and like what your part in it was, and we can just talk about what you contributed, and then yeah, we can go from there.
Sure, fantastic. So yeah, how do I get started with it? Well, sort of as you were sort of moving into sort of the pro realm, the realm of pros, um, I had sort of hopped on for we did a brief live play series,
Hmm.
Thrones and Bones. Look, YouTube it; it's out there. And during that time, you were sort of actually, I think I've got the timeline wrong here, but I knew that the first sort of stirrings of it was happening just towards the end of the Thrones and Bones, and it came up, like I said, you DM me, but even earlier to that. So if I was to, it can be really chaotic in my approach to the answer. I remember when you were first writing the campaign for that would first incept the Vineyard, and you were talking to me about different ideas you were having and stuff like that, and I remember sort of you talking to me about how it was going and the ideas you were having and stuff like that, and seeing all the effort you were putting into. I was looking at my notebook, which has got a bunch of scribbles in it, and it's like squirrel, like with a question mark and a bunch of nonsense on it, and then seeing your very carefully organized notes. I was like, oh, God, at least it's reproducible, right? So it's good. It's science. It's role playing science. And then you said, oh yeah, I'm going to turn it into an actual supplement, and you said, would I like to be involved? And I was like, well, it was quite a big scary leap, but yeah, absolutely. I've always, I think everybody who's ever DM'd has probably had a dream. It's like, yeah, I'm going to write my campaign setting. They've looked through somebody's campaign book, and they've been like, I can do this. My setting's going to be, it's going to have a fantastic book. It's going to be thousands of pages with no illustrations and no contents page and no index or anything, but I'm still going to get it out there. And so, I think, yeah, everybody has that dream of being able to contribute to that. So it was definitely something I jumped at the opportunity to do.
Yeah, I remember having you as one of my first game master mentors and just asking how you did things and why you did things, which isn't necessarily how I would do things, but that wasn't the point. It's important to have different perspectives and to see what makes sense for you as a storyteller. In a lot of ways, I believe that when I was initially conceiving of the campaign that I was running, and it was solely based on me asking players, what do you want to play? And then from there, just asking them very simple prompts like, wouldn't it be cool if blank? And then from there, I developed whatever their complete culture, background, whatever was for their character around what they were interested in. And that's pretty much where the Vineyard comes from. Is for me, the Vineyard was the linchpin that kept that setting interesting, because I had a lot of ideas about different sectors or quarters in the city, and what made them interesting. And we have the druids, we have the wizards and stuff like that, and everybody's a big trade organization, and it's basically an oligarchy that is sort of contracts out their muscle to a mercenary company called the Company, of course, because I wasn't big into naming things complex things, or using complex names. And that's who the player characters were, was the Company. And they started to interact with the Vineyard. And the more they interacted with the Vineyard, the more interested they got. And I was like, okay, so this is the cool thing in the setting. So for me, I really I think in a lot of ways, because I put more love into the Vineyard than some of the other areas, that's what made it appealing. Because it was just inherently an interesting idea. What if a crime organization controlled necromancy? What if? So, and that's really what it came from, was that. And then we sort of developed it from there. I really like your submissions, if we pivot to talking about you, in your work. I really like your submission with some of the basic histories. And I will say, before we get into it, I liked them so much that we actually are developing the adventures that we're potentially going to attach onto the main book itself, based on some of the stuff that you've written, because of how good it is. But if you want to just talk about we could talk about with the ghoulish invasion, right?
Sure, yeah. So I remember when we were talking about topics and we're coming up with, like we were sort of sorting out what sort of segments we're going to do. I remember you asked me to do the history, and I was like, oh, but I'm not good at history. I want to do like something weird and gross and something. And I was like, I don't think that's a good fit at all. But then as I got into it, I think I remember my first draft, and it was basically, you know, mid early 2000s sort of 3.5 splat book introduction, which is just like a bunch of dense text which is telling you where things have happened. And that one of the things that got me excited about rewriting it is that you're like, you've got to make it actionable. Everything has to be something that the player can pick up and use as an adventure seed, or it has to have something, something needs to have at its core of every paragraph needs to be something that they can go, oh, I want to use that, that's a good idea, I can have that. Because it's easy to do that with like other stuff in a splat book. Well, not easy, but it's easier, right? Like if you're describing different parts of the city, you'd be like, yeah, you can imagine the sort of adventures you go in there. But like, it was really, really challenging to think, oh, well, okay, so history, how do you make a timeline, usable in that way, sort of. But to get to your actual question, the Ghoul invasion. So this is going to be difficult because I've got a push to talk button, which means that if I try and alt tab into the document, I'm just going to insert a bunch of characters into it. But here we go. Scrolling down. So yeah, the Ghoul invasion was the idea that we wanted to show how the Vineyard had slowly taken control of necromancy, but not just in the actual sort of casting of spells. We were discussing like the idea that they seize they control the means of resurrection. By sort of controlling minds and places where these gemstones are sort of sourced from. But there's also the cultural and sort of the propaganda approach that they might have had to make people more afraid of unchecked necromancy. This idea that necromancy should be something feared and needs to be regulated, needs to be controlled by somebody who knows what they're doing. And so the idea was like some events from the history where behind the scenes the Vineyard was pulling the strings and causing things, setting things in motions that could be generations away, or completely sort of like Machiavellian sort of Rube Goldberg approach to causing horrible necromantic disasters that would turn that they could swoop in and solve. Setting up patsies to take the fall, like training or releasing sort of fragmentary knowledge of necromantic texts and stuff, which desperate wizards would come into contact with and end up just destroying themselves with this unchecked power, and then they could sweep in and tidy things up and say, "Isn't it a good job that the Vineyard is around to solve this?" And part of that was this idea of the of them sort of ghouls, like in other settings, and they're people who have succumbed to a almost like a cannibalistic urge through whatever reasons, desperation or some sort of cultic activity. And what if this this idea of it being a disease debased form of undeath, it's not like the pure preservation that can be brought through the fine artifice of a cut diamond. And what if they sort of offered this to people, this poison chalice, to give them the strength and power to strike back at injustice and stuff, but knowing that they would eventually lose control and go on a rampage, and having this creating a sort of a boogeyman that they can sort of manage. It's creating a crime which they are perfectly positioned to deal with, especially one that can reoccur and flare up and is a constant problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very interesting, I think, very easy way to create a villain that you don't have to necessarily worry about or get rid of entirely if you don't want them to be gone. Because I think it's in a lot of ways like zombies and like undead are the sort of easy button villain. Um, and creating them in such a way that they have personality as per the direction or the direction of whatever lieutenant you want to introduce under Ashland's rule is sort of all you need to keep an interesting undead horde a constant threat, whether it be like very civilized or whether it be like an actual like ghoul crisis where they're, you know, eating a bunch of people.
It sort of creates, depending on how people use it. 'Cause we've been very open with, how much of the sort of background they want to pick up and use. And yeah, I think it is another good feature of the Vineyard as a source book is that you can take as much or as little as you want. Like, I need a reason for there to be, ghouls in the sewer, right? Like people indiscriminately throw ghouls at all sorts of sewers and settings. But now we've provided a way that you can then a few episodes later, like a few sessions later, you go, well, okay, what people are asking, where do these ghouls come from? Now you can sort of draw it back. You can make them sympathetic in a way. In fact, certain elements of the way that we set up the sort of implied setting that of the city above and stuff like that sort of creates an axis where maybe killing, destroying, eradicating the ghouls isn't sort of the approach that your characters want to. It helps move away from sort of problematic elements of like, because ghouls are sentient, right? And not always a product of their own choices. So, why should just why should it be sort of just seen as a sort of, like you said, an easy button for creating a villain, which you can, all you have to do is kill. So you can be really go as deep as you want with it, or as a classic dungeon crawler.
Yeah, you can just take a straight Romero approach and just like, okay, well, undead have broken out, and this is a story about survival rather than a story about political intrigue. But it's all in there if you really want to use it, and sort of leverage a little more sensibility and high classness to it. Let's talk about the Pallor and what sort of weird shit you got into to write something like this, and sort of, if you could please come up with like a little bit of a summary of what the Pallor is, because I know what it is because I've read it. Our listeners have not heard anything about this yet.
So I remember when we were talking about the idea of lieutenants and how we were going to develop a cadre of them, and the role they would play in both the source book and the setting. And I was taken by how a lot of there was lots of different types of horror were being represented by the different lieutenants we have. We've got sort of gothic horror. You've got a more sort of more modern sort of bit of fantastical realism, sort of bringing some modern elements in, and into some of the villains and stuff like that. And I was like, well, my favorite kind of horror is body horror, and sort of gross, I guess gross horror. Like I love the thing and the thing. I love lots of old 80s video nasty sort of things. And I was like, well, that's not going to fit directly into the Vineyard. That's not kind of the kind of setting we're trying to produce. But there's elements there that can be repurposed and delivered, which act as a vector for the sort of feel of sort of not creeping. I don't want to say creeping malevolence of their majesty and stuff like that. But how can I get all the elements that I sort of really get me excited about horror, but bring them in a way that is actionable, because that's obviously the key word with Vineyard, but also it fits with everything else and doesn't overpower things. And another sort of side inspiration that I was having is that I wanted a lieutenant that would work at a low level, but also higher levels as well. I wanted something that could scale a little bit, because having a lieutenant who's a low level one, it's kind of like in video games where it's like, yeah, I am one of the 12 evil lieutenants of the grand boss, but I'm also the first one, so I'm like really easy to kill. And it's like, you want something that will grow with the party possibly, and so you can use it at any point in your adventure. And so where am I going with this? Well, the Pallor is effectively, it's built off one of the ideas that you gave me. It was I think it was an undead plant being like a sort of a corrupted dryad or something like that. And I was like, well, that's cool, but what if it was, instead of being a dryad, it was a fungus, because everyone likes fungus. That's super cool horror there. Lots of fun decay and undead sort of notes on it. But what if it was also like something that was very insidious and spreading, like not just a myconoid sort of myconoid sorcerer or something, but it's actually something that was more distributed, like a fungus. Like the mushrooms that you see in a fungus is just like a very tiny percentage of the entire body. It's creeping root system that spreads across the undercity and finds its way into every sort of nook and cranny and every secret, but also into people. Like it's an infection that can reanimate bodies and not just into mindless zombies, but fragments of the person that used to be the pallor before they became this fungus, because there's also a human element there in the story of this lieutenant. But it creates a fragment, which it's not a hive mind, it's a single sort of isolated person, but it's a copy of this greater whole. And so you've got this weird situation where there's a lot of, maybe, I don't want to say high concept, because it's still just a fun horror monster enemy, but there's lots of stories you can do about these bodies keep getting up from the morgue and they keep trying to steal this particular item. Like, why is this happening? It's because like their majesty has set the pallor to try and get this thing, and it's doing it in the weird ways that it does. Why do all these rats sort of assist this weird criminal by unlocking doors and stuff? Because they're infected with the pallor as well and reanimated by it. So the pallor is in the rats, it's in the birds, it's this sort of enemy that sort of can surround your players, and they can only become aware of it as the adventure continues and they start encountering greater and greater hosts. So yeah, sort of creating a character that's actually a disease was a fun challenge, and I'm really, really happy with the way it worked out. I'm really hoping that there'll be lots of seeing what people do with it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm so excited, especially hearing you talk about it. Initially, I remember we were having this discussion, like, what sort of lieutenant would you like to do? And then I said, well, if you're looking to create, we were initially talking about like you doing something similar along the lines of. I was like, well, that's funny, because initially for the campaign that I wrote up something called The Dying Garden, and I'm going to give you one paragraph because that's all I've written about this thing, and then you can just take it and run with it. And it kind of became what it became. It was initially based off like myconids, like you said, and sort of like had a little bit of that infection to it, sort of a hive mind. But I think that the direction you've taken it, in which it's really sort of encapsulated in so many ways, like Body Snatcher and like The Thing, and this is something that could be like a very high level plot for a lot of game masters that want to really have a long-term backup in case their plots are not as interesting. And you could just very carefully plant all these different things throughout like the last 20 sessions or whatever. And then eventually you reveal, you've got the Pallor who has been doing all this stuff, and it becomes a real problem at some point when the players, or you feel like the players, are invested enough to be interested in that plot. And that is something that can drive a lot of anxiety in storytellers, especially, is like, are the players going to engage with this? Are they going to be interested in what it is that we are telling, or like what I've presented with them and stuff like that? But something like the Pallor, especially, you can introduce very gradually and over a few months even. And then when it finally drops, like, this is what you're dealing with, like, I think the reveals are going to be very impactful for the table.
Yeah, it's because it could be anything, right? It's the sort of thing that has very small things, like, oh yeah, there's it's a rot, and you come across something and it's covered in rot, or it's the places in the implied setting where the character might be carried are going to have this sort of rot and decay in it, and it's just there. Like people start to put things together and be like, there's opportunities, that stuff, and there's also lots of interplay with the other lieutenants. I think around it's more of a disposable lieutenant in a sense, because there might be a character who's sort of appears to be quite important, and then he gets taken out, but then it turns out it's all adding into that flavor of the Vineyard being all plans within plans within plans, and giving people something to action on, and it's also like a fallible one as well. It's not, I think it's a conversation we had early on. It was like this idea of it not being a hive mind in the sense that everything knows what everything else knows. The only way that the pala can learn something new is that it's the body that it's got that knowledge in, it decays in the garden, right? So two fragments of it could get completely different perspectives on things and end up fighting against each other because they don't, they can't really communicate with each other outside of, like the way a normal human beings would. So it's sort of something that is not like a Deus Ex Machina sort of approach. It's like, yes, this is a fallible thing that can be fought against. And if you want to have that heroic story, and I think that's true for a lot of the lieutenants and the Vineyard as a whole, is that they're all human. They're not like Saturday morning cartoon villains. I mean, they might have some sort of affectations in that. They might have some cool tropes from it, and they can be used that way if you really want to. But if you want to really sort of go in and go like, okay, well, this person really evil, or have they been? Is this the sort of the system that has been set up, the machinations, the web of lies and obligations and contracts, obviously, which are going to play a big role. That keeps people in their place. Can players break that? Will that be their heroic story, or will they end up just bound up by it as well?
Yeah, I especially like, and I'm so glad that so many of the writers have really embraced the quotes that we have asked of you. And I just wanted to read one about the Pallor. There is no I, no me, only the Pallor, the decaying hand of their majesty, and soon, when it is done, there will be no you either. Super chilling stuff.
You do a good job saying it as well. Not got that, the British accent. It sort of really takes an edge off.
Oi, there will be no you either.
Yeah, because I can't pronounce it. I don't pronounce any ooze. But yeah, it's the art and everything. It's like the emphasis on presentation and feel and immersion is really, as a DM, I know, like, it's just, I can be very visual when it comes to like ideas and sparking and stuff. I tend not to, like, I'll buy a Splat book and I might not even read a lot of it, but I'll be like, oh, that's a really cool idea, and I'm going to take it my own direction because being a DM is a lot of it is like, oh, I want to create my own world and stuff. And the constraints and the sort of focuses that you've put through your management and stuff it's been sort of great to operate in. Like limitation sort of is a really good way of triggering sort of pretty sort of cool stuff.
Yeah, for the project, me and Ev have really focused on how do we find the right track to put them on, and then they just need some railings so they can go as fast as they want, and really let people develop what they've wanted to develop, and just made sure that before they hit the accelerator on their formula car, that we are pointing them in the right direction first. And we have been really rewarded with exceptional writing because of that. Rather than letting them be like directionless and just writing whatever and then doing a bazillion rewrites, what we have done is just like, let's have a couple of design meetings and really figure out like what it is that we're doing, and then we'll make some course corrections in the middle if needed. And I know some writers sometimes require more questions to be answered, and I'm always available for that because of that. So, but that's just part of the job of like being the creator and like working with Em as the narrative designer. But yeah, we're super happy with it, and we're super happy with having people play with it and then hearing those stories. And like, I think I'm so excited because like there's so much about this, and as well as like the work you've done for the Vineyard history and everything, that it's so like it's written in such a way that it can be taken to so many different tables and tell so many different stories that it's going to be really fun to see how all of those develop over time. So with that being said, I think we're going to wrap here. Do you have anything that you'd like to talk about? I know you don't exist on the internet, but did you have anything that you wanted to talk about before we wrap here?
No, I'm looking forward, like I said, looking forward the same way everybody else is. I'm in the community and can't wait for people to get their hands on some of the stuff that you got. I know we put out some really cool stuff now. I know if you go to your Patreon, I believe that they can get access to or is that sort of deal ended? The siren
Oh yeah,
has.
yeah. So that's yeah. If you subscribe to the backer kit, you're going to get the preview of the Siren written by Sarah Madsen. And if you're listening to this much later, we are also going to be putting out a different preview PDF of Kiana Shaw's Lieutenant, the Confessor, um, whom I'm super excited about as well. And yeah, the Kickstarter will launch in April, and that's of course the best way to support us is to support and back the Kickstarter itself. But you can get an early access preview with the backer kit, so do that, and that'll be in the show notes.
Other than that, the only thing I can really suggest that people can engage with the sort of the writing I do is if you're in the United Kingdom or if you're from somewhere else and want to have a weird weekend, please check out Empire by Profound Decisions, available wherever good LARPs are hosted.
Yeah, I'll put a link to their website in the show notes as well. Thank you for coming on, Dave. And if you would like to support the podcast so that I can begin editing them, because currently I don't edit them because I don't get paid any money for this. So if you would like to support, then you can always become a patron, and I'll have additional rewards as time goes on. But thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.